stripes on a certain uniform and a rocker of yellow hung below that comes up in a palm. Insignia. She hides under a deuce and a half this time, sleeping on a roll of foam draped in mosquito net. Sandflies hover throughout the night. She sleeps under vehicle exhaust and heat, dreaming of mortars buried beside her, 3 stripes painted on each cold tube, a rocker of yellow hung below. It's you she's dreaming of, Sergeant. She'll dream of you for years to come if she makes it out of this country alive, which she probably will. You will be the fire and the hovering breath, not the sniper, not the bomber in the streets, you. So I'm here to ask for this one night's reprieve. Let her sleep tonight. Let her sleep. Pause a moment and it'll give us movement. Smoke. The gin your wife sent from New Jersey, colored mint green with food dye disguised in a bottle of mouthwash. Take a long swig of it. Take the edge out of your knuckles. Let it blur your vision into a tremor of lights. The explosions in the distance are not your own. In these long hours before dawn on the banks of the Tigris River, let her sleep. In her dream, your eyes are pools of rifle oil. You unsheathe the bayonet from its scabbard while she waits. On a mattress of sand and foam, there in the motor pool, she waits to kiss bullets into your mouth. It seems ugly, doesn't it? To be honest, it seems ugly, but it's nowhere near ugly enough. We have a lot of work to do, and in so many ways. I think I'll jump to this. Actually, oh yeah, that's right. I reminded myself. So there's somewhat of a plan. I had one thing to remind me to do something. Some of you might have said, I just want to thank those who made, and it's so, my glasses are terrible. But I want to thank Red Hen for making the broadsides that are out there. I love broadsides myself. Like Elise and I, my wife Elise also was a poet, and we were thinking like, we should just buy a bigger house. The only reason we have a small place in Orlando, Florida, just so we'd have some space to put up more artwork on the walls, you know what I mean? So we could live with the art that's in the house, but we can't always see. So we have to try to rotate them out or something. I won't be putting this one on my wall just because I think it's really far too deep, but my mom will get a copy of this, certainly. But it's called Al Hazan of Basra. This is another poem that I wrote while I was in Iraq. If I could travel 1,000 years back to August 1004, to a small tent where Al Hazan has fallen asleep among books about sunsets, shadows, and light itself, I wouldn't ask whether light travels in a straight line, or what governs the laws of refraction, or how he discovered the bridgework of analytical geometry. I would ask about the light within us. What shines in the mind's great repository of dream? Whether he studied the deep shadows daylight brings, how light defines us. So that's a way for me to thank you, for the writers in the room, and for those who didn't stand up, but I know you're writers as well. I appreciate the hard work you do to see how light defines us, and to illuminate those spaces that need to be searched into, you know? I'm going to read one. Am I doing good on time, man? Nobody's throwing anything at me like a shoe or anything. That sort of thing, you know. I was in a Tony Blair got one for another too. The problem with throwing a shoe is you got to remember to bring an extra one. You know what I mean? You got hands, man. And then, I mean, the precedent is set. You have to have something pithy to say, something highly memorable. You know, you can't just. And then, do you practice throwing ahead of time? Because usually in crowded situations, a lot of pressure, and to get off a good throw under pressure like that, it's difficult enough, but then to say something memorable at the same time, that's phenomenal. So next time, you know. So, I'm not going to try to describe what this memoir's trying to do. I'm just going to dive in. I was in Mosul, in the northern part of Iraq, much of the time that I was in country from 2003 to 2004. I went back with National Geographic in 2011, I think, to do a story about Baghdad. It's about not about the like famous people and people in charge, but like people like my family members, welders, machinists, and you know. This passage comes from I was in Iraq itself, which was raids, night after night of raids. We were the feeder pipeline for Abu Ghraib prison. I had an English degree before I went to Iraq, so they often called me the professor. So when we would get prisoners from a raid, we'd take them back, the squad leader would say, hey, professor, let's go write the depositions. So I was the guy that would, because I could write a sentence, I was the guy, as if I was some detective or something, who had to write the sentences. So if you told me what those guys did in that room, then I wrote it down in a way to try to put them away. And if you ever get a chance to read a poorly written book, it was ghost written, hopefully the ghostwriter is not in this room at the moment. Tony Lugaranis wrote a book called Fear of Harsh. And that book, I realized, because I was getting interviewed him in Ireland, and I realized when I got about 3/4 way through that he was talking about me. Not just figuratively, like me. He was there in some of the prisons in Mosul, and I would bring the guys in late at night. When the depositions came back in, he would look at them and say, no, they're just farmers. You know, these common sense would say, these aren't the people we're looking for, you know? Not to quote Star Wars somehow, in LA, you know, somehow. To get back from the joke to the real, that he would say that the officers above him would say if there was anything damning in those depositions, then they just went straight to Abu Ghraib to figure it out later, sort it out later. But don't let this become confessional. The United States of America wages war. And since there is no first Gulf War, if you've used that in a sentence, I think you're wrong. There's no second Gulf War. I was supposedly in that war. We've been fighting or in occupation, just with Iraq, since 1991. Next year marks the 25th year, our silver anniversary. We have such great endurance for the war. You know? So what voice will you give to that? What light will you shine on that? I look forward to your part of the conversation. Here's one attempt by me. The briefing for the night's raid is underway. Actually, I'm just going to skip that. So the briefing happened. Okay. A lot of stuff happened. We learned a lot of things. We're just going straight into it. The soldiers enter the house. The soldiers enter the house. Soldiers, determined and bored and searing with adrenaline, enter the house with shouting and curses and muzzle flash, det cord, and 5.56 millimeter ball ammunition. The soldiers enter the house with pixelated camouflage, flex cuffs, chem lights, door markings, duct tape. The soldiers enter the house with ghillie suits and Remington sniper rifles, Phoenix beacons and night vision goggles, lasers invisible to the naked eye, rotor blades, Hellfire missiles, bandoliers strapped across their chests. The soldiers enter the house one fire team after another, and they fight brutal, dirty, nasty, the only way to fight. The soldiers enter the house with the flag of their nation sewn into the sleeves of their uniforms. They enter the house of Toledo and Baton Rouge imprinted on the rubber soles of their desert combat boots. They enter the house and shout, "Here's Johnny," and "Honey, I'm home." The soldiers enter the house with conversations of Monday Night Football and the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. They enter the house with cunt and cooch, cockwallet and butcher's bin on their tongues, these obscenities. The soldiers enter the house with paperbacks in their cargo pockets, Starship Troopers and Black Hawk Down. We were soldiers once and young. The soldiers enter the house straight out of Compton, with M&M saying, look, if you had one shot or one opportunity. They enter the house with their left foot. They enter the house the way one enters cemeteries or unclean places. The soldiers enter the house with their insurance policies filled out, signed, beneficiaries named, last will and testament sealed in manila envelopes half a world away. They entered having just ordered a new set of chrome mufflers on eBay for the Mustang stored under blankets in a garage north of San Francisco. The soldiers enter the house with only 9 credits earned toward an associate's degree in history from the University of Maryland. They kick in the door and enter the house with a memory of backyard barbecues on their minds. They kick in the door while cradling their little sisters in their arms. They kick in the door and pull in the toboggans and canoes from the hillsides and lakes of Minnesota. They kick in the door and bring in the horses from the barn, hitching them to the kitchen table inside. The soldiers enter the house with Mrs. Ingram from 2nd grade at Billin Elementary School and with Mrs. Garupa from AP English at Madero High. They kick in the door and enter the house with their arms filled with all the homework they ever did, and they sit down to consider the quadratic equation, the Socratic method. The soldiers enter the house to sit cross-legged on the floor as the family inside watches on, watches how the soldiers interrogate them, saying, how do I say the word for friend in Arabic? How do I say the word love? How do I tell you that Private Miller is dead? that Private Miller has holes in the top of his head. And what is the word for ghosts in Arabic? And how many live here? And are the ghosts Ba'ath Party supporters? Are the ghosts in favor of the coalition forces? Are the ghosts here with us now? And where do the ghosts keep their weapons cached? And where do they sleep at night? And what can you tell us about Alibaba? Is there an Alibaba in the neighborhood? The soldiers enter the house and take off their dusty combat boots and pull out an anthology of poetry from an assault pack, Iraqi Poetry Today, and commence reading poems aloud. The soldiers say, "This is war then, all is well." They say, "The missiles bomb the cities and the airplanes bid the clouds farewell." The soldiers remove their flak vests and turn off their radios, smile and stretch their arms, one of them yawning, another asking for a second cup of chai. The soldiers give chocolates to the frightened little children in the shadows of the house. The soldiers give chocolates to the frightened little children and teach them how to say "fuck you" and how to flip off the world. The soldiers recite poetry as trays of chai and tea and cigarettes are brought into the room. The soldiers, there in the candlelight of the front room with Iraqi men of military age, zip-tied with flex cuffs, kneeling, sandbags over their heads, read verses from Iraqi Poetry Today. The soldiers switch off their night vision goggles and set their padded helmets on the floor while the frightened little children pretend to eat the chocolates they've been given, their mothers shushing them when they begin to cry. And the soldiers, men from Kansas and California, Tacoma and College Station, these soldiers remove the gloves from their hands to show the frightened little children how they mean them no harm, how American the soldiers are, how they might bring in a pitcher of water for the bound and blinded men to drink from soon, perhaps if there's time, and how they read poetry for them, their own poetry, in English, saying, "Between time and time, between blood and blood, all is well." All is well, the soldiers say. The soldiers kick in the doors and into the house and zip-tie the men of military age and shush the women and the frightened little children and drink the spoon sugar stirred in the hot chai and remove their stinking boots and take off their flak vests and stack their weapons and turn off their night vision goggles and say to the frightened little children softly, with their palms held out in the most tender gestures they can offer, their eyes as brown as the hills that lead to the mountains or as blue as the rivers that lead to the sea, saying, "All is well, little ones. All is well."